Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this remote meeting of the Lakeville Planning Board. It is Thursday, December 17th, 2020 at 7 p.m. First item I'm going to read into the agenda. In accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, relating to the 2020 novel coronavirus outbreak, December 17th, 2020 public meeting of the Planning Board shall be physically closed to the public to avoid group congregation. However, this meeting, to view this meeting in progress, please go to facebook.com/LakeCAM. Do not need a Facebook account to view the meeting. This meeting will be recorded and available to be viewed at a later date. This is a joint meeting between the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission. I would like, just before I let Conservation open their meeting, just to refresh everybody, to all attendees remain muted until they've been asked to speak or been yielded the floor. So Mr. Chamberlain, if you'd like to open the Concom meeting. Oh, Mr. Bouchard is here.
Bob is here.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The meeting will come to order. This is a meeting of the Lakeville Conservation Commission. It is December 17th, 2020. And I guess that's it.
All right, very good. So tonight's meeting is to discuss the redevelopment of the site plan for 43 Main Street, which is the former Lakeville Hospital property. The topics of tonight's discussion will be zoning, use, site layout, parking, access and circulation, and wetland delineation. And before we get started, I just want to take a moment. The applicant has exercised the Development Opportunities District as the zoning that they're going to be using for this project. And I'd like to take a moment to recommend that the Planning Board adopt rules and regulations for the Development Opportunities District. This is a recommendation from Town Council. In 2012, when the Development Opportunities District was voted at town meeting, the Planning Board was given the opportunity at any time to adopt rules and regulations specific to densities, land use, bulk, height of structures, yard size, lot areas, setbacks, open space, parking, use of signs, and other dimensional criteria. However, they never did. So we're not going to vote on this at this meeting, but as a topic of discussion at our next meeting, we will put it on the agenda for the Planning Board on the January 7th public hearing for this project. We will have the Planning Board have on their agenda to adopt some rules and regulations related to the, again, densities, land use, bulk, height of structures, yard size. And the recommendation from council was to mirror our already existing industrial use group. So at this time, I'd like to yield the floor to Brittany Gesner, I think from PHB.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
I will go ahead and share my screen. All right, everyone seeing that?
Yes.
Excellent. Good evening, everyone. So as you're all aware, we are here for our public hearing number 2 on the Lakeville State Hospital redevelopment project. And as Mr. Chairman already explained, tonight we will discuss a continuation of the wetland delineation. Again, we are focused on the delineation itself. We are not going to discuss the impacts or lack thereof from the development on any regulated areas. We just want to make sure everyone's on the same page with regarding the wetland delineation itself. After that, we will then move on to discuss zoning, use, dimensional provisions, site layout, parking, access, and circulation.
Brittany, actually,
Yes,
I think I overlooked something that I should have done, and
course.
also give Chairman Bouchard the same opportunity. Could you unshare your screen and then we do a
Yes.
brief roll call of attendance? And I want to run through all of the other attendees, just so that it's clear for the record when somebody takes minutes. Here this evening from the planning board, myself, Mark Knox is attending. I have Barbara Mankowski present. If you could just raise your hand. Peter Conroy, Michelle McEachran, and Jack Lynch. All members of the planning board are present. Also, I have Scott Turner from Environmental Partners, who is the peer review agent for the town. He's present, and Amy Quessel from Town Council is present also. Mr. Robert Mather is present representing the applicant. Tyler Murphy from Rhino Capital is present. Are you the only one from Rhino Capital, Tyler?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And from VHB, we have Brittany Gesner, as I've already yielded the floor, Sarah French. Is there anyone else from VHB here tonight?
Nope, that's it for tonight.
All right, very good. And Mr. Chairman Bouchard, if you could just run through the Concom attendance and then we'll carry on.
Sure. Just raise your hand. Joe Chamberlain. I see you. Nancy Yates. Hi, Nancy. John.
Yep, he's here. He waved.
I'm here.
Mark John LeBlanc. And Josh Flaherty. Okay.
And myself.
Yeah, I thought I got you, but look,
Yep.
we're all in attendance.
All right, so that being said, back to you, Brittany.
Excellent, thank you very much. Just let me get situated here. I will share my screen. All right. So again, public hearing number 2, wetland delineation, and then a focus on zoning, use, and site layout. So with that, we'll start off with Sarah French this evening, and she'll go over wetland delineation and where we stand regarding the peer review process on that.
Thanks, Brittany. Good evening, everybody. Again, for the record, this is Sarah French. I'm a wetland scientist with VHB. So I think one of the goals for tonight's meeting is to kind of hone in on the wetland delineation, I think between VHB, the third-party reviewer, environmental partners, and the town, I think we're in a good agreement on the wetland lines out there. We are still kind of honing in on establishing the high water mark for the vernal pool that's within wetland 1. We're going to ask that we continue that to the next meeting, but if possible, try and do a vote on the establishment of the wetland lines that are out there. So I'll kind of just run through the wetlands that we have out there on the site, and within the vicinity of the site, we have 4 wetlands. Wetlands 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'll start with wetland 1, just kind of describing it. So wetland 1 is forested scrub, shrub, palustrin, kind of a large open marsh area. You can see from the topo, Brittany, I don't know if you want to go to the next slide, but you can see from the kind of the topo elevation features that we have out there that there's a pretty kind of steep slope that runs down, and then it's a very flat open area. A lot of the kind of facultative species that we found out there, that over 50%, a lot of high bush blueberry, sweet pepper bush, red maple, just kind of within this large open marsh area. The buffer zones include a lot of greenbrier, a lot of invasives, including oriental bittersweet, Japanese barberry, that sort of thing. And then kind of in the center northern portion of this wetland, we have kind of like a swimming hole area that stays flooded year round. There's a old decrepit dock that's there. People used to, I think, just use this as a swimming hole. And then kind of further north, the wetland kind of goes off property and then it comes back onto the property. That is within the area of our solid waste disposal area. I walked this with the commission back, I think it was in November. So there's a lot of visible debris in this area. As I said, it's the solid waste disposal area. That's where very minimal impacts we're going to have to the wetlands for removal of that debris. So there's a lot of tires, a lot of metal appliances, concrete, that sort of thing. The commission saw that when we walked that portion of the site. So there'll be approximately 510 square feet of just very minimal impact to remove that solid waste area. Let's see. Wetlands 2 and 3, those are both isolated wetlands. So those are non-jurisdictional. So I'm not going to go too much into describing those, but they're both just kind of small isolated depressions at the north of the site. Wetland 4 is Rush Pond. So we went out there based on the third-party reviewer. They had us delineate the bounds of the bank of Rush Pond, which we did several weeks ago. We also found a bordering vegetated wetland that extends off of the bank. That included a lot of facultative and facultative wetland species, including red maple, pepper bush, and then again, a lot of kind of greenbrier and Japanese barberry that kind of border that buffer. I think that about covers it for wetlands. Does anybody have questions or anything regarding the wetland line? I also want to mention that we don't have any impacts to the wetlands aside from that small kind of sliver of area on the northern portion of wetland 1 where we're going to be removing the solid waste disposal area debris.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I've seen some of the correspondence that's gone on in the very recent past few days about this vernal pool. What are the potential impacts? And when I say impacts to the wetland line, where it's going to be tough to determine with the weather that we had today.
Right.
That this
So
drag
we
out.
don't have, so we don't, and I can give you a little bit of background of what we've been discussing regarding the vernal pool. So we don't have any impacts to wetland 1 or to the vernal pool. We're trying to establish, so we reached out to Natural Heritage. We got the details based on the certification. It was certified in 1991, so 30 years ago. Since then, Rhode Island Road extension was constructed in 2010. So this entire area has been, it's significantly changed. We think that there's a lot more water being impounded into the area. So we think that the vernal pool has likely grown, and obviously 30 years, there's been significant changes to wetland 1. So what we've been discussing with environmental partners is let's take a conservative approach, and we're gonna flag out the mean annual high water line. The project itself is not going to impact any wetlands, any vernal pools, aside from the small little area that we're impacting to the north, which doesn't have any vernal pool characteristics in it anyway. But the only thing that might be impacted with the vernal pool kind of mapping out that mean annual high water mark is we're not allowed to have any stormwater features within 100 feet of a vernal pool. So that's the only thing that might be impacted, but we're still working through figuring out that line with environmental partners. So we're hoping to kind of just continue the vernal pool item and really just focus on coming to an agreement on the wetland line, which is kind of a separate issue. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so it's the jurisdictional difference that the vernal pool has basically the 100-foot of nothing that related to drainage can come within that. Whereas the rest of the wetlands, you can go within 100 feet as long as we protect that area. Normal
Correct.
jurisdictional DEP process. So it's going to affect your plan more than anything as to where you put the drainage.
Potentially, depending on where we come up, where we map out the mean annual high water mark for the vernal. The vernal pool is within wetland 1. So it doesn't extend.
I guess just to clarify, it may cause us to slightly alter one of our basins, although I don't think that's an insurmountable alteration. But one of the basins would enter that buffer zone. I think it enters it by about 20 feet right now. So I do believe we could make that slight modification if we find that that is necessary. I think we're just still determining where that line falls. But other than that minor alteration, it really doesn't have much of an impact on the project.
All right, so at this point, Chairman Bouchard, would you mind if I asked Scott Turner, the peer review gentleman, to clarify and get his comfort level on the difference between the wetland line and the vernal pool and how they proceed?
Yes, please do.
So Scott, what are your thoughts as far as the flagged wetland line? Will that change in any way, or do you envision that changing based on what you've seen with the vernal pool and the discrepancies with the original and what you see currently with the vernal pool? Will that affect the wetland line?
So our environmental scientist, Brad Holmes, has been out there a number of times. He's looked at the lines, and he is in agreement that the lines that are shown in the field are correct. As both Brittany and Sarah mentioned, we are still discussing the limits of the vernal pool. And that's definitely impacted by the weather today, but we're making progress and need to resolve this and tie this up. So with regards to the wetlands, feel comfortable with them. The vernal pool, was still working on it. And I do agree with Brittany that the impacts to the site, depending on how we decide to treat the vernal pool, will be minimal. Worst case, if we decided that entire wetland was a vernal pool, you know, both large detention basins are within the buffer zone, but they could be, in my opinion, I'm not designing the project, but in my opinion, they could certainly, they have room to accommodate that. So I agree. I think we can go ahead and approve the line, or the lines and the status of the different wetlands, but the vernal pool, we need a little more work. We need to do a little bit more work.
And was Brad Holmes supposed to join us tonight?
Yes, he's on the line. He's here.
Okay, because I did see a Brad I just let in. So would you like him to speak to any of this, or?
Sure. I mean, Brad, do you have anything to add with what I said?
No, you're correct. I've reviewed the wetland lines in the field. They are accurate. We're still working on the location of the certified vernal pool within the wetland system. And Scott is correct in his analysis. I don't need to add anything more than that unless you have additional questions.
No, I just wanted to make sure you heard everything because you came in a little bit late. But so just to be clear, my question was, I wanted to make sure that if the Conservation Commission approved the wetland line and any adjustment with the vernal pool needed to happen, in your estimation, it wouldn't affect the wetland line.
Correct. The limit of the vegetative wetlands are not going to change.
Right. Okay. So I think Chairman Bouchard, you could call a vote to approve the wetland line if you felt comfortable.
I have one other question, though. More of a interpretation. It would be helpful in reviewing these wetland lines and features such as vernal pools, et cetera, if there was more detail given in these maps that show the potential impact areas and what the work in progress is, so that we kind of have a working knowledge of what's going on and what to expect down the road.
Sure. And are you referring to, you know, the work that's proposed within buffer zone?
Yes.
Okay. We can certainly go into detail on that. I guess the intent with this was just to confirm the wetland delineation itself and to not discuss impacts or approve the project within buffer zone. However,
Yep,
we're happy to do so. And I could share the plans right now if we want to have that discussion now. I defer to you guys if.
No, I don't want to have the discussion now as much as I think Chairman Bouchard brings up a good point, because I think that we have them slated for only one meeting at Conservation, and they probably need either a preliminary walkthrough of just what's going on, like he just described, of work within the buffer zone, so that they can come back to that one meeting, or it's probably going to be continued. Unless you can provide, I know what other engineers have done is shaded areas on the plan that would maybe to exclude the building, but everything within the buffer zone, if you kind of shaded what's within 25 feet, within 50 feet, within 100 feet of the buffer zone, of the bordered vegetated wetland, I should say.
Yeah, we're happy to have that discussion at the next meeting or whichever meeting you'd like. We're happy to go into that detail.
Sure, I would be anxious to see that, like I said, so that we can review, the commission has a chance to review it before we have, it's time to vote on it.
Yeah, and Bob, I think the purpose for this meeting, we were hoping almost kind of like an ANRAD, just get approval of, yes, this is where the wetland lines are. You know, we're in agreement of that these are the wetlands. And then going forward, kind of talk about the work within the buffer zones.
Mr. Chairman, then do you think we should hold off on voting to accept this, or?
It sounds like it would be safe to accept the wetland line as flagged, and that's not going to change anything. And they're still going to have to work out the vernal pool matter, which will then affect some possible work either within or push it out of the buffer zone.
Right.
So that's going to need to be concluded before you guys have your hearing.
All right. Well, then before we take the vote, I'd like to hear from some of the members of the commission that I know are listening, and if they have an opinion as to this, I'd like to hear them.
Would you mind calling out by name and just see if they have a comment? Or Brittany, could you unshare your screen?
Absolutely.
Joe Chamberlain?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I think Nancy Yates might have a little more knowledge on this area than I do, but it seems to me that the health and well-being of a vernal pool depends as much upon the pool as upon the couple of 100 feet going out in all directions from the pool. And I'm just wondering how concerned we would be about structures getting within that 100-foot buffer.
Okay.
Well, I think that they won't if it's a vernal pool. Was that my understanding, Sarah? If the vernal pool is established to be larger, that pushes everything 100 feet from wherever the vernal pool is automatically.
That's correct. Yeah. The vernal pool habitat, though, based on the wetland protection regulations, the vernal pool habitat is only within the wetland. But under the stormwater standards, you're not allowed to have a stormwater feature within 100 feet of a vernal pool.
But to be clear, that only applies to stormwater features, not structures.
Right.
So under the Wetlands Protection Act, 100 feet outside of a vernal pool is protected only so far as it's within wetland. Once it's outside of wetland, it's no longer protected.
That's my understanding also. Nancy,
I was curious of who you talked to at Natural Heritage.
I talked to Lauren Burt.
Okay,
We got records from the 1991 certification. We sent those out with our comments to the review, to the third-party review.
okay. My only other thing that seemed very curious to me says in the VHB report, wetland one seemed to have potential for fish.
Yeah,
That's
so when
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, that's all right.
Yeah, so when our wetland scientist was out there in April doing the delineation, it was a very large ponded area. She didn't see any fish mass, egg masses, any typical vernal pool characteristics, and made the note that it looked like it had potential for fish, but we do know that the area dries out. It's just a very shallow, large. And like I said, because of the construction of Rhode Island Road in 2010, I think a lot of water is getting impounded into that area than historically was there.
Okay, I just didn't agree with that. Had potential for fish, but
Yeah.
that's something that
No.
that environmental partners can address, not me.
No, and I agree with you because we do know that the area does dry out.
Okay,
Sarah, correct me if I'm, does the swimming hole portion dry out, or does that stay wet all year round?
That stays wet all year round.
And then when the rest of it floods, it all connects with that, correct?
Correct. That's my understanding.
I don't know if when that pond floods, I don't think it connects. I don't think that overflows. I could be wrong. But that would be a question I would ask environmental partners to look at.
Yeah, we have sorry,
As
go
far
ahead.
as the wetland line goes, I have no problem with the wetland line. Mine concerns the vernal pool, and that's.
Well, we kind of want to stay on track tonight, that our
Okay,
discussion should be the wetland line only.
okay.
okay, let's move on then. John LeBlanc,
As far as delineating the wetland line, I don't have any problem with that.
all right, good. And Josh, how about you?
It sounds like Scott and Brad are on board with the wetland line, so it sounds good to me.
Okay, and that leaves you, Mr. Chairman.
I am good with the wetland line as it's flagged, sir.
Okay, so we'll proceed with a vote, if that's okay.
A motion to approve the wetland line.
All right. Motion and second. All those in favor? Joseph,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
John,
Aye,
Josh,
Aye.
and Mark,
Aye.
and myself, aye. So the motion passes.
All right, very good. So as far as Concom goes, they're pretty much done tonight. And their next meeting will be, is it February?
February 4th.
I believe that's, yeah.
So this is Scott. I just want to add something.
Go ahead.
When they vote on the notice, they will be voting on all the work within the buffer zone, which is going to include items that are going to be addressed at the next hearing. Next hearing, we're going to be talking about lighting. We're going to be talking about plantings and so forth. And some of the plantings are within the buffer zone. So I think it might be relevant for them to sit in on that hearing.
So they should attend the January 7th meeting?
Yeah, I mean, the work that's involved with the project in the, there's a lot of work covering a number of the different areas. So I think that, if they're interested and I mean, they're going to be voting on things like landscaping within the buffer zone and so forth. I think it makes sense for them to be present.
Oh, Chairman Bouchard, you may want to, if you wanted to stay present until the end, you're welcome to. But if you wanted to, at some point, close your hearing, you probably want to continue until the January 7th next public hearing.
Yeah, personally, I'd like to stick around to hear the rest of
Very
the
good.
meeting, but if the other members want to leave, that's fine, but we can take a vote to close it.
Oh, you don't want to close the hearing, you just want to continue.
I'm sorry, continue it, right. So we'll proceed.
Okay, so
Where a motion?
I'll make a motion to continue the hearing till January 7th at 7 PM.
Second?
Second,
All right. All those in favor? Let's start with Joseph.
I think you said aye.
Oh, okay. He's muted.
Yep.
Nancy,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Josh,
Aye.
Mark,
aye.
and myself, aye. So meeting is continued.
All right, so continuing on with the zoning use, site layout, parking, access, circulation. I'll turn it back over to you, Brittany.
Thank you. Okay. So on to our next slide, zoning. As Mr. Chairman already explained at the opening of this meeting, this project is applying under the Development Opportunities District. The Development Opportunities District was adopted to the zoning bylaw at the June annual town meeting in 2012. It is interesting to note that this site, 43 Main Street, was approved into the Chapter 43D program in October of 2012. So there is a correlation between the introduction of this district to the zoning bylaws concurrently with this site being adopted into the Chapter 43D program. And just by way of summary, the intent of the Development Opportunities District is to provide opportunities for economic development expansion in a planned multi-use district while protecting the natural resources of the town. The Development Opportunities District is an overlay district superimposed over those underlying districts as shown on the zoning map of the town of Lakeville. So use. We are proposing a warehouse use building. And as outlined in the zoning bylaws, a warehouse or a wholesale distribution center is permitted by special permit within the Development Opportunities District. The Planning Board is the special permit granting authority within the Development Opportunities District. And it is important to note that no special permit shall be granted within this district unless the total land area of the site exceeds 25 acres, and our site is 49.4 acres, so almost double that minimum requirement. Again, as was mentioned at the beginning of this hearing, the zoning bylaws do indicate that the planning board or the special permit granting authority may adopt regulations relative to the densities of land use, the bulk and height of structures, yard sizes, lot areas, setbacks, open spaces, parking, signs, and other dimensional criteria within the Development Opportunities District. However, these regulations have not been adopted to date. Additionally, it is worth noting that had these regulations been adopted, or if they are to be adopted, there is an item in the zoning bylaw that does allow the planning board to waive strict compliance with those regulations when in their judgment it is consistent with the intent and purposes of the zoning bylaws. So with that, there's really not required regulations for me to compare the project to. However, I do have listed here some intensity regulations that are referenced elsewhere in the bylaws, and I have identified what they are for the existing property or the existing development, as well as what we're proposing. So lot size, again, 49 acres, we're not changing the lot size. Frontage, we're not changing frontage. The front yard setback, so separation from the public way to the front of the building, under existing conditions is 112 feet. and we will be increasing that to over 400 feet and pulling the front of buildings away from Main Street by almost 300 additional feet. The side yard setback, under existing conditions, there is a building within 42 feet of the side yard. And again, we will be pulling that back so that we have at least 100 feet between a building and any side yard. Rear yard, however, we will be decreasing. Today, there is over 1,200 feet between any building and Rhode Island Road. We will be decreasing that, but it is significantly farther away from Rhode Island Road by more than 200 feet. Number of stories. Under existing conditions, there are 2 very tall buildings on the site, 7 stories tall, and we will be decreasing that to just have a 1-story building. So that decreases building height on the site from 84 feet down to about 45. Maximum percentage of land covered, that will significantly increase on the site. And then most importantly, the buffer strip between any impervious area, so parking lots to any residential district. Today, there is a surface parking lot 15 feet away from a residential abutter. And under proposed conditions, we will be increasing that to be more than 100 feet away from a residential abutter. So site layout, moving on from zoning a little bit and just to look at the site layout. As previously mentioned, the site will be accessed by 2 curb cuts off of Main Street, and there will be no vehicular access to the site from Rhode Island Road. We are providing a loop here. You can see by this blue line, you can get into the site by either one of these curb cuts, and there's a loop. You can encircle the entire site and come back out on the other side in either direction. Parking, because this is a speculative building, parking for industrial developments is based off of number of employees. We have assumed 1 employee per 1,000 square feet. That's a pretty standard assumption for warehouse type buildings. That is also our assumption that goes with our septic design. So it's consistent across the entire design for the project. Accordingly, that would require 403 employee parking spaces. We are providing those in these purple areas, about 2/3 of the parking at the front of the site and 1/3 in the rear. Then we are also proposing the approval for a bit of additional parking. Just because this building is proposed speculatively, we do not know who the end user is, and they may have a higher demand for parking. So we are requesting an additional 160 spaces, again, about 2/3 in the front, 1/3 in the rear. And the proponent has committed to land banking those spaces. So because those are above and beyond what zoning requires, we are asking for the approval to construct them. However, the proponent is committed to not constructing them unless a tenant deems they absolutely need them. So that's why they're shown green, because they will just be grassed areas unless a tenant decides that they really need them. Then on either side of the building, we will have loading docks. You can see these in red. And then on opposite, you'll have, there's a maneuvering space, and then opposite those loading docks will be trailer storage area, which is shown in orange. And then the next page, this just shows the plan view. This is the front of the site, so we can see in a little bit more detail the full access curb cut here, and you can come into the site. You can peel off into this loading dock for a truck, or an employee getting to the back could continue on. All of the employees using this front parking lot will use this curb cut, or trucks could continue on into the loading space. And then this is the rear of the site. So again, picking up at the top of the previous page, that this circulation drive continues on. An employee could access this parking lot. Here is the land bank parking in the back. And then this also connects to the loading docks on this side. And with that, that does conclude my presentation, but I do want to mention we did receive a letter from the peer reviewer on these items. We've reviewed them. They did not really result in any significant changes. We have responded for some requests for clarification. And I don't think we have any issues or concerns with the items brought up by the peer reviewer. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it back over to the board for questions and discussion.
So it does seem like some of these items are going to overlap between meetings as well as you've done with laying out the schedule for us. Look at site layout, talking about that tonight. I know you guys had some discussion with the fire chief for hydrants and things like that. I feel like that is somewhat of site layout as well. I don't see him here tonight, but I did get some notes from the meeting that you guys, of the phone meeting you had together, about hydrant placement, egress from the building. Will that come up again in another meeting, do you think, Brittany?
Yeah, I think hydrants we can discuss during the utilities meeting. But as far as access and circulation, we did discuss fire truck circulation, and he seemed okay with what we were providing. We did demonstrate a fire truck turning movement within the front employee parking area based on a generic fire truck. He did follow up with me after that to provide dimensions of the town of Lakeville's largest fire truck. So we're going to revise our vehicle turning movement to reflect that truck. But beyond updating that figure, he seemed comfortable with what we're proposing regarding access and circulation.
Chairman Knox, just to continue on that same thread as what Brittany had, the site is designed for tractor trailer traffic, so it does bode well and go well with what the fire department's needs are, but we are going to check further into that and follow up on it. One item that did come up certainly was fire hydrants, so that is definitely going to be picked up in our utility discussion. But the basis of design, we talk about things like locations of roads, curb cuts, entry and exit points of the buildings. All those things we are aligned on. And as we continue on, a lot of the questions, again, putting aside hydrants, were really probably more related to, and we sort of realized this throughout the call, to building permit related questions. So how we are labeling fire alarm panels, where they are, and those types of things, standpipes within the building. So there is definitely questions about those things, and we're going to be providing some documentation on how that's going to play out. But from a planning board site layout, I really think, and Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the verification of turning radiuses and vehicle movement, as well as fire hydrants. Again, a lot of those other questions were more fire alarm panel and piping related questions that would be picked up on a building permit set, a CD level set, and that became very apparent in our discussion.
And believe me, I'm not looking to get into the weeds with anything inside the four walls. You guys talked about a lot today, it looks like, at your meeting, and I do want to keep it to, again, the turning radiuses of the trucks to make sure they can safely get in and out. The parking, I mean, you're going to be ADA compliant with everything you have to do. Is there a layout for that now, or can you give us a little rundown, or is that going to be somewhat tenant driven as well?
No, I can walk through that right now. I will, let me just flip to that page on the plans. So we are proposing 14 accessible parking spaces split between the two parking lots, 3 of those van and 11 of those standard accessible spaces, and that is in compliance with ADA and AAB requirements.
Okay.
Additionally, just one other item, I do want to note that the applicant is proposing 20 electric vehicle charging stations, and those are not EV ready, but they are proposing to actually construct the charging stations, and one of those charging stations will be ADA accessible parking space as well.
Coal powered.
What was that?
They're coal coal-powered
Hey,
cars.
we can only do so much, At least
I know,
we're
you're
trying.
trying. That's good. Okay.
Mark, could I ask a question before we pass parking
Yeah.
too far?
Yep, go right ahead.
Could Brittany share her screen again, as far as like the one general layout overview of the parking?
Yes, I will. And I'm going to share the plans, just because I think that might be a little bit easier, but if you'd prefer the colored version, I'm happy to do so. Just let me share my screen. All right, can you guys see that okay?
Yep.
Okay.
So my question is, to access the back employee lot, do you think it's smart to have these employees going between probably over 200 trucks? I'm talking about the left side of the warehouse facility.
And so that is actually intentionally why we have this separate roadway here. The proponent actually lost quite a fair amount of loading docks as part of their program to have that road, and it will be an operational management component to have these employees use this circulation road rather than have employees go through the loading dock.
Okay.
So that was an intentional loss of loading docks to accommodate that external drive aisle.
That's good. And I don't know if it's possible, but if you can maybe possibly think of your two land banks, I would prefer the back one be built first if they had to stage it in some way. If they said, hey, we just want another 45 or 50 spots and then we'll be good. I personally would rather feel as though the back one should go first rather than the front and come out towards the street. But that's more of opinion than.
I'll defer to the applicant on that one.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah, no, I think it's a valid point and completely understood. We are definitely expending resources in the front from a screening perspective, which again, not to jump the gun, we'll get into some of those renderings and our landscape, but there's definitely a large expenditure out there. So I think it's a great and valid point and definitely makes sense. And just to touch on the back parking lot, typically what you see is more of the 9 to 5 employees that park in the front and more of facilities management and some of the more shift oriented employees in the back. So there's definitely less traffic heading to that back lot. But it is good to give a tenant flexibility with how they like to position their employees over shifts.
So there will be, I know this is pretty early on, but there would be a sign right around the bottom left-hand corner of that facility before you enter those trucks that basically be like trucks only. Because I know what will happen if cars go up there. Cars go 3 times faster than trucks, and trucks are professional drivers and cars aren't. So
that's exactly right. You're hitting on the flow and kind of how this is supposed to work. That's
okay.
So, and I'm going to pose this question to both Scott Turner and you, Tyler, that you have 2 access roads, and we talk about flow. It looks like you have them lined, like they're actually a street and divided. Is that the case? Because it looks like a narrow road for a tractor trailer, like they may have to go over that line. Would it make sense for you to have an inlet and an outlet rather than 2 entrance exits? And I'm looking at that from a traffic safety standpoint on Route 105 as well.
Can I take that one? These roads do look narrow, but I would say that's just the scale of this drawing that we're looking at. It is 100 scale, and if we zoom into the specific sheets, these are 30-foot wide drive aisles, which is standard for tractor trailer trucks. And then we do have a fairly generous curb radii, and we did run vehicle movements to demonstrate that trucks can turn right and turn right in and turn right out of both of these curb cuts.
Okay.
Mark, it's Scott. I looked at the turning radius plan, and typically where you get trucks crossing over into other lanes is when they turn in. And the radiuses or the radii that are at the entrances look good in terms of, making sure that trucks can make that turn without crossing over.
Yep.
So I'm comfortable with that. I do think that the suggestion, and I had pointed out in my letter about signage, although I did not specifically state adding signage, but the point of restricting passenger vehicles in that loading area on the west side is a good one. I had concerns about that as well. So you may want to revise the plans, or maybe, when you get to a point of possibly issuing an approval, condition any approval to limit passenger vehicles through that loading area.
All right. So before I turn the floor back over to planning board members, I have one other site layout concern. So on the left-hand side of the property, we talked about an earthen berm and how nicely landscaped it's going to be with native species. But on the rear, on the Rhode Island Road side of the property, there are currently foundations going in. This property abuts residential. And my take of the plans is just say where that 60 spaces of land bank parking is much higher than Rhode Island Road when you get to your finished grade. And there's no buffer or privacy barrier to stop either a visual or a sound mitigation on that side of the building. What's your stance on that?
Yeah,
But-
I would, go ahead. I would say, so there will be a significant vegetated hill up, so that will provide almost a bit of a screening, both visually, and it will just separate this activity from the abutters. So also our limit of work really stops at the edge of this infiltration basin. So all of the existing vegetation, with the exception of the portion that's within the solid waste area, that will be removed. But this is all existing vegetation that really will not be disturbed as part of the project. So one of the benefits in the rear is the existing vegetation, mature vegetation, will remain back here.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and one thing that became clear from our introductory presentation is that there needs to be a little bit better angles and kind of renderings of this. So we've picked that up and we'll have that prepared so that it's not, looking at a plan of 100 scale, which, we're already picking apart kind of, it's a bit hard to understand sense of scale and how much space that really is. So we're going to have, instead of plan views, we'll also have full 3D rendering views of what some of these areas look like, and it will be a better discussion point. So we will have those coming forth in the next hearing.
All right, and so that may answer my next question, but because the planning board is a special permit granting authority, and it looks like we will be dealing with possibly a height issue in the special permit. I think that if your 3D model satisfies that, that's great, but I guess I'd like to have a sense of the height of the existing hospital building in comparison. If you could do like a cross section or try to superimpose that on part of that 3D as well, so we can get a sense of what this height change is from existing to new.
We did not have that. We can certainly do that. So that can be brought forth for the next hearing. Absolutely.
Thank you. That would be helpful. Barbara, do you have anything to add?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just one item.
Go
I
ahead.
misspoke previously where I mentioned the decreased rear yard setback to Rhode Island Road. This 200-foot dimension is to the property line, which is fairly close to the development, and then there are wetlands. So the proposed building will be significantly more than 230 feet away from Rhode Island Road. And that was really to an abutting property, which is separated from the development by a wetland. So just a point of clarification on the rear yard setback.
Would you mind for the next meeting bringing that number? Because I know there's already been comment about the 230. to maybe get the distance to Rhode Island Road and the distance to the nearest dwelling?
Yes.
Roughly, I mean, within
I
10
could do
feet
it
of
for you right
accuracy?
now if you wanted.
Sure.
The
How about
wonders of the
How
one.
about 673 feet, plus or minus? More
Over
than
500,
500.
over 500 Rhode
Over
Island Road.
500. Yep.
And you're probably about 450 to that house.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Barbara Mankowski, do you have anything you'd like to add? Barbara, could you unmute? There you go.
Yeah, no, I'm all set, Mark.
Thank you. Peter, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I have one more question, Mark. Could you bring the plan back up again? I'm sorry to do that, but
Sure
Joe,
thing.
I'll get you right after I go through the planning board members, Joe. Go ahead.
so sorry. It kind of looks like some of the I'm putting my mouse over it, but I know you can't. On the right side of the building, the loading docks that will be at the highest point. If you
Yeah.
exactly. Do you have any kind of software that shows how trucks will get into those ones?
Yep. So these are shorter. We actually have a shorter maneuvering distance in this area. So this area will be intended to be for box trucks. And then we have designated, in response to the third party review, we have designated these farther spaces for dumpster and a compactor area. So this area will be for smaller vehicles, but we do anticipate that a truck would have to come in and turn left and then back up probably a little bit longer than they would want to,
Yeah.
given the dead end nature.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then I guess just piggybacking off of that, we received a similar question from the third party peer reviewer in this area as well. And so a change that we're going to incorporate into the project will be to remove 7 of these trailer storage areas and put a little spin circle here to allow trucks to come down and use the spin circle to turn around and then back into these farther loading docks.
Okay. Michelle, do you have anything? And Brittany, could you unshare your screen, please?
Absolutely.
I mean, my question, I guess, is, I think you've done a good job covering a lot of that, is in regards to entry and exit. If they're both going to be used as both entry and exit. My main concern is I would like to see trucks heading towards 495 as opposed to the opposite direction. Is there anything that you've taken into consideration in regards to that? I'm wondering.
I would say that that'll definitely be a topic of our traffic hearing, but we would expect all of nearly all, if not all, of the trucks to be entering the site on and off of 495. We do not expect trucks to be turning, I guess when you're leaving the site, to be turning right out of the site.
Okay.
Yeah, and Michelle, I had brought that up as a point just in terms of identifying entry and exit points, and where it became tricky as we started to investigate that possibility was really for the passenger vehicles. So people who are going to be working at this facility certainly be going left, right, and the other way, even though the trucks have that really dedicated route back to the highway to and from, to your point. And so we started looking at identifying one as an exit, one as an entry point. It became very difficult when you're trying to make it just for trucks versus passenger vehicles, because the passenger vehicles do need the flexibility. I don't think that's necessarily a concern from anyone, but we did kind of go down that road, and I did push that item, and that's where it sort of, it became difficult to really identify the two. So right now we do have them as both entry and exit. But I think in practicality, how they're gonna work from a truck standpoint is there's gonna be one that's an entry and one that's an exit, and the passenger vehicles will kind of flow in between that.
Very good. Thank you. That's all I have.
Before I ask you, Jack, I just looking through the schedule and I don't see anything on signage on any of the hearings. And do you have a sign location right now? I'm not looking at the plan, but in size or anything?
We can include that in the landscaping presentation, which will be the next hearing. We can add signage to that.
Okay. Jack, do you have anything to add? No, thank you. Joe Chamberlain, you had a question? You're muted also.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
My question was, and I always bring this up whenever I see a parking lot of more than about a dozen spaces. All looks great until we get a foot of snow like we just did. What plans do you have for snow removal and dispersal?
Sure. I will share my screen again. So the benefit of this land bank area is, if that doesn't get built, that will be a great area for snow storage. However, we do need to plan for in the event that does get built. So there is a fair amount of fairly level landscaping area, around the buffer of the property. So there's some over here, and I would say same thing over here. And so there's a fair amount of landscaping area throughout this site that will be used for snow storage.
And I also noticed from your soil evaluation, I was surprised at the great quantity of high quality soils there. There's a lot of loamy sand and sandy loam and so forth, all of which would take in melting snow very quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Brittany's heard me say this 1,000 times, but over a year ago, I suppose at this point, we were walking in the rear of the site, and one of the gentlemen we were with dropped his cup of coffee by accident. By the time it hit the ground, it was gone, almost instantaneously. And so Brittany's heard me tell that story a number of times, but it's in my experience, it's got to be the sandiest soil I've ever been a part of or worked on. It's really pretty remarkable.
2-minute perk.
And I'd say, that's really great. And that's definitely reflected in our stormwater design as well. When we get to that topic, you'll see that we are proposing to recharge about 5 times the volume that is required for recharge to the aquifer per the stormwater standards. So that's a great find from a stormwater designer's perspective.
All right, Brittany, would you mind unsharing again, please? Thank you. And before I turn the floor over to any abutters, Scott, do you have any other comments you'd like to make at this point, or have I overlooked anything?
So a couple issues, or not issues, just points to make. The letter that I described, or that I sent, had a lot to do with zoning, which I know you're going to cover with the regulations. A lot of those comments were made simply to give a point of comparison for members of the board with regards to other zoning that is, exists on the property. The building height, I know we talked about, because of the size of the building footprint, it's a 10-acre pad. There are some considerable cuts and fills. I had asked for, some elevations that show, and I know that Tyler mentioned that there would be some elevations that are being prepared. So I think it's important for the boards to understand, there'll be areas where you have 10 or 15 feet of fill, and then the building. I still think the building height is less than what's there now, but I think it's good. It would be good to show that so that you all can see how the building is going to look, or how the building in terms of height, how it's going to sit on the site. Let's see. with regards to parking, you know, it's an interesting discussion. I think that the ratios are consistent with what you would typically see for a warehouse use. However, and this is a little bit of an overlap with the traffic. You know, I think they're showing in the traffic, the trip generation, 682 trips per day. If they're building 400 parking spaces or 560 parking spaces plus the truck traffic, the traffic volumes will be much higher than I think is depicted in the traffic study. So I think that's something that we need to think about. Again, I think the parking is fine. I mean, I think the parking is consistent with other ratios, and absent a tenant, I think it's the right way to go. It's just absent a tenant, trying to make sure we understand the traffic and making sure that the traffic is consistent with the parking. I made a couple comments about, you know, curb, you know, in your response, Brittany, you'd mentioned that you're gonna have precast concrete. I think you should have granite at the entrances just because you're gonna have so much truck traffic there. I understand it's a cost issue, but
Granite will be at the entrances because it's Mass DOT. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. That there will be vertical granite curb along the curb radii at the end at both curb cuts.
okay, yeah, the letter says concrete, so I was
Throughout
surprised, but-
throughout the interior of the site, just at
Yeah.
at the two curb cuts, there will be granite.
Okay,
Excuse me, Scott, do you mind speaking up, putting your volume up a little bit?
sorry.
Thank you. That's better.
Okay. I think my microphone is worn out from being on so many meetings today. You know, made a comment about pavement, especially in the areas where they're going to have loading. You know, again, that is something that is, and I referred to it in regards to the subdivision rules and regs, because the zoning bylaw refers to them. But it could become a maintenance issue. I'm assuming you're going to have a geotechnical engineer design the pavement, or at least make recommendations for the pavement thickness.
Correct.
Made a comment about the signs. Their submittal last week did have a sign detail submitted, which is, you know, generally generic because they don't have a use or they don't have a tenant yet. So it looks reasonable. So yeah, I mean, I don't have any, I really don't have anything that is controversial for sure. But I think
Okay.
just a lot of my comments are just regarding understanding for the board that you have a clear picture. And to let you know, we do have draft comments regarding noise and landscaping that we'll be forwarding shortly. We're just trying to work out some of those comments. And I know that there have been questions about buffer zones, and you know, there will be plenty of comments about the berm on the western side. So we are generating comments to that effect now.
Thank you. Go ahead,
Mr.
Brittany.
Chairman, can I just provide a little bit of additional information on the building height comment? We can go
Yes.
ahead and prepare those site sections for review by the board, but just to elaborate, the existing buildings, which are approximately 7 stories tall, their first floor building elevation is at approximately elevation 120. And so if you assume a 7-story building, the height of that building is about 84, 85 feet. So that puts the top of that building at about elevation 200. Our proposed building, the finished floor is at 110. So actually lower than 10 feet lower than the finished floor of the existing building. And our proposed building height is about 45 feet. So it puts the top of that building at about elevation 150. So it's about 50 feet lower than the height of the existing buildings on site. But we can prepare site sections to help illustrate that.
Okay, thank you. Joe Chamberlain, you have another question or comment?
Well, a question for Brittany. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
You mentioned elevation at our last meeting. Where is that elevation coming from? I mean, I live on Highland Road, so-called, because it's the highest point in Lakeville. I'm just below the crest of the hill, and I'm at 112. the pond is about 54. How can we have 200 or something down there on Main Street?
The top of the building was 200.
The top of the 84-foot tall building
That's
is
the
elevation.
That's the existing.
Correct.
And what was going to be the highest point of a proposed building?
About 150 plus or minus, very round numbers off the top of my head, but lowering of about 50 feet.
Even again, 150 feet, and it's
Elevation above sea level. I'm sorry, to be clear, elevation above sea level. So the building itself is only 45 feet tall. The finished floor elevation is at elevation 110. And so if you add 45 feet to that, the top of the building would be at approximately 150 feet above sea level.
I get it.
Confused because isn't Long Pond 54, 55 feet above sea level? Isn't that the
Well,
elevation?
our wetland is at the wetland one on our site is at approximately elevation 80.
I remain confused.
Okay.
Excellent.
Mr. Chair, if I can just jump in there real quick, just to help Joe out. Joe's referring to a map datum that he's using. He's,
My question was, what is the datum that these figures are coming from, right?
Yeah, the NAVD 88, Joe, is what you're talking about, and Brittany's not necessarily using that map datum.
No, I am referring to NAVD 88.
Oh, well, there you go, Joe. You're in big trouble. I'm reviewing myself.
Anyway, Nate.
Excellent.
I tried.
All right, so at this point, if any of butters have questions or comments related to zoning, use, site layout, parking, access, and circulation, I'll go through. I see Edward Rand. Do you have any questions or concerns related to those topics? No. Mr. Scott, Dick Scott, do you have any questions or concerns related? You got to unmute yourself, sir. Nothing. Try again. Right there, Dick. Say something. I think we might be able to hear you. You have to say something though, Dick. No, sorry.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
Does that work?
Horribly, but yes.
Okay, turn off your speaker. I have about 100 comments on the subjects, but I'm going to just hit the highlights if that's okay.
Yeah, well, be brief at that, please, so everybody else gets a chance, but yes, go ahead.
Nothing? Nothing?
We can hear you.
You can?
You said yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. If I put my comments into some big categories, they're traffic related and noise related, and much of them are tenant driven. And I'm not exactly sure, other than the physical characteristics of the plan that's before you, how you're going to be able to address the noise and the traffic.
We're not going to address noise or traffic tonight.
No, but I'm just mentioning that the traffic is related to the noise and the use is related to the traffic and the noise. And since there is a difference between a warehouse, a distribution center, and a fulfillment center, there's a lot of loop back to the subjects that you've talked about. Just a highlight that I'd like to talk about in that regard would be, depending on what's stored inside the warehouse, if there's any flammables or combustibles, that may affect what the fire protection for the warehouse would be. And I noticed the warehouse over at Christmas Tree Shop has a rather large tank for fire protection. And I'm not sure that there's even space for the fire protection, but it is related to use.
Dick, let me cut you off there for a second. I believe that tank is a cistern because they don't have adequate water. Now, Brittany, could you answer that from public water supply, would you have sufficient water pressure to sprinkle that building without a tank?
Correct. We are not proposing a tank. There may be a fire pump to increase pressure, but we are not proposing a fire tank to increase quantity.
Okay. And then in terms of site access, if you look as you come down Route 105, past CVS and head toward Bridge Street, right where the funeral home is, it goes from 2 lanes down to 1 lane. And as you know, there's a significant amount of turning there. So I'm wondering if in access considerations, there should be consideration for from the funeral home to the entry on the east side, some accommodation for a truck lane in the plans.
So, Brittany, do you want to take that? Or
I would say that's something that we should discuss as part of the traffic hearing regarding off-site traffic access.
Okay. I'm not sure that this is been called out for, but the demolition is a significant part of the project. And I'm wondering when the demolition is going to be discussed, or is that strictly building department and not planning department?
It's not part of the planning process. Nate, would you like to comment anything on the demolition portion of that? It's really not under the purview of the planning board, unless, I mean, we could condition something, I guess, during that, but is it really our responsibility?
So during the demo, and I wouldn't mind hearing from Amy on this, is if the planning board saw fit to condition hours of operation during the demo, dust control measures, stuff like that, it might be the appropriate place to do that. Per, you know, agreeing with Dick, there might be an option to condition, and I expect that Rhino is going to do their best to control those things anyway. Noise, dust, hours of operation for the demo process.
And the last question I have is, the peer reviewer mentioned that there's a lot of activity, and as the peer reviewer feeds back to the planning board,
yeah, we also
will
have.
I be able to offer some suggestions also? Because I've done a fair amount of research on the subjects, and I think it might be useful, but I don't want to talk about 100 things here.
Dick, if you wanted to
occupy everybody's time, but I would like to know how I get my comments into it. You made the comment once that you didn't want any written comments.
I don't know that I said that.
Planning board.
I don't know that I said that. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the chat thing, but if, Dick, could you tip your camera forward so we can see you? All we get is the window behind you. Thank you. If you wanted to actually put those comments in writing, I know that you sent some to Michelle, the permits coordinator, and they were forwarded to Scott, the peer reviewer. They're not falling on deaf ears at all. And I think that where you're very concerned and active in this, you should probably write everything down and get it to Michelle that you've been sending it to, and she will get it to Scott, the peer review engineer.
I appreciate that, because I think the issues in the demo continue to be sound, noise, traffic, and the one that I'm really struggling with, because I'm not sure you have the space to deal with it, and that's the backup alarms at night. And it's not just Rush Pond Road, it's also Lori Lane.
Yep.
And
So,
I know that's not noise, but that's what I'm focusing on.
Yep.
That's all I have.
Noted. Thank you. I see Catherine Azak. Oh, Nate, you have a,
I'm sorry. I just wouldn't mind, just to make sure that I didn't misspeak as far as conditioning the site plan special permit with the demo. I'd just like to have Amy clarify that if the planning board can in fact do that through the special permit.
Amy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Absolutely. This is a redevelopment project. So yes, you would be able to condition the demolition along with the construction, along with actually designating snow storage spots. They should probably do that on a plan so we know exactly where those are, things like that. But yes, that's definitely within your purview.
And to Mr. Scott's recent comment about noise during demolition, that seems difficult to control. Is that?
So usually the conditions that we put on noise during demolition is the hours of operation, the hours that they're allowed to do the demolition. And I mean, this is, I don't know what the plan is for the demolition, but usually it's, you know, if they're going to take the building apart to take it down, they can do that, you know, fairly easily. I don't know if they're going to implode it. I don't know, but you know, whatever is done, we can control by hours of operation. I think that any noise hopefully wouldn't be a consistent noise. That's what we would be looking for.
Thank you.
Yep.
I see an abutter, Catherine Azak. Do you have any questions or comments related to specifically to the topics of tonight's discussion?
No comments at this time.
Thank you. I have Octavio Aguiar.
Same here, no comments, just more so for the next meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Turner, Paul Turner, do you have any comments about tonight's topics, the zoning, use, site layout, parking, access, circulation?
Not at this time. Thank you.
You're welcome. Brian Smith. Janet Scott. Is that the same feed that? I think that's everybody then. So do any other planning board members have any other comments? I think you've done a good job of vetting the zoning use, the site layout, parking access. We've got some good feedback. Anybody? Nate, do you ever? So was it that easy that we actually could conclude this hearing and continue? Scott, you agree with that at this point?
If there are no more comments,
I mean, I don't think we've missed anything with what's on tonight's agenda.
no, I don't think so. I think that, you know, it'll be the next hearing about noise and the hearings about traffic, I'm sure will be maybe a little lengthier.
Yep.
Just based on what we're hearing.
So at this point, I'd like to make a motion to continue this public hearing until January 7th at 7 p.m. And the topic of that public hearing will be architectural design, landscape, lighting, noise, signage. Brittany, at that point, will you guys have that 3D rendering?
Yeah, we'll have some 3D illustratives as well as 2D site sections in various locations.
Okay. Will those 3Ds also have sort of a topographical grade outside of the building itself?
Yeah, I think those will be easier to see in a 2D site section. So almost if we show you, if you look down on the plan and we were to draw some lines through in various areas, and then we were to cut it and draw a site section so that you can see existing grade, proposed grade, and then also existing building heights and proposed building heights. So it'd be a lot easier to see those topographical features using a 2D section, but you will be able to see it in the 3D illustrative as well.
All right, thank you. So I have a motion to continue to the January 7th. Can I get a second from the planning board?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor? Barbara Mankowski. She's saying aye. Peter?
Aye.
Michelle?
Aye.
Jack? And myself. Motion carries unanimously. Before everybody departs, I just want to catch Paul Turner. Did you get a butters notification to come tonight?
Yes, I did. I was watching it on Facebook.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because
Yes, I did.
Mike O'Shaughnessy reached out on your behalf to me. I didn't get a chance to talk to him, but I would recommend that he attend public hearing too if he wants to talk to me about this, because I think it might create a conflict if I spoke to him outside of this venue.
Okay, not a problem.
But, I'm glad to have you here too, and look forward to having you at the next meeting.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. A motion to adjourn. I think Barbara seconded that. So I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Peter says aye. Barbara says aye. Michelle and Jack. Myself, aye. Motion carries unanimously. That concludes this hearing of the, this meeting of the planning board. Thank you, everybody.